of how they crossed or how their families crossed.
Yeah, because you said your parents were brought here as children, or
So by the time my dad got here, I think he was like, he was probably 18 already. My mom was probably middle school, and so yeah, so varying degrees of ages, right? Some were obviously like they had younger siblings too, so some were just like infants, like 1 or 2 years old. I mean, their parents were obviously like 30, 40s, right? So the whole age spectrum of people.
I think you mentioned your mom. You said she first arrived in Ohio. Where did your dad go?
So, yeah, great question. So my dad arrived in Garden Grove, which is in California.
Somewhere in California.
Yeah, so it's in Southern California, so close to like Disneyland.
Okay.
So there was a large like Hmong population that landed down there, and then he was just kind of trying to figure things out because he also comes from a big family of about like 10, right? So my mom's like about 15, he's about 10, and for him though, he didn't come with his whole family like my mom did, right? He only came with a cousin and a younger brother. And so he left the rest of his family behind. And so when he got here, he had to figure out everything, right? Like, how was he going to go to school? How was he going to get educated, find a job, so that he could eventually sponsor the rest of his family to come. Yeah. So he had a pretty big task and responsibility ahead of him, right? And that weight, that he had to carry, definitely, I think, it centered him. It forced him to take life seriously, right? Like you think about most young people are just trying to enjoy life and make the most out of life, and I think he did for the most part, but he always had in the back of his mind, it's like my family's not here, right? So I gotta do what I gotta do to try to bring him here. And so he went through various like different jobs and eventually landed a more like permanent secure job with the U.S. Postal Service, federal job. And after a few years of working there, he was able to like buy a house in Southern California, and then eventually sponsored his family to come to live with him in SoCal. And then long story short, how my parents met was, I think eventually Ohio was too cold, right? Because it's the Midwest, it snows out there, it's too cold, and so
was it like a different climate from like?
Oh yeah,
where they
yeah.
live?
Because Laos, Thailand is tropical, like year round, right?
Yeah.
And so when you go from like tropical 70s to 90s to like 0 degrees, it's culture. It's a culture shock. It's a weather shock. All of that, and especially for the older generation, like they don't like it, right? And so I think my grandparents probably, or really did not like the weather, and talked to different relatives, and eventually found their way to Fresno. And then in Fresno, Fresno is home to the largest like Hmong New Year celebration in the world, right? So every December at the Fresno Fairgrounds, thousands and thousands of people come together to celebrate the Hmong New Year, and that was actually where my parents met. So my dad was still in SoCal, my mom was in Fresno.
But because there's like such a big...
so that was like the event to go to, right?
Oh, that's pretty cool,
yeah. So that's where like a lot of single people, especially back in the day, would meet up. And so that's how they met, and then they got married, and then eventually moved to Fresno. So
it's pretty cool. That's pretty cool.
Yep.
So you grew up in Fresno?
Yeah, so I was born in Anaheim, and then lived there for a year, and then we moved to Fresno.
Okay.
Yeah, so I like to tell people I'm from SoCal, but really I was raised here in the Valley.
That's cool. That's cool. Do you have siblings?
4 younger.
4 younger siblings?
Yep, so I'm the oldest of 5, so 2 younger brothers, 2 younger sisters.
Okay, that's cool.
Yep.
How was life growing up? Kind of like...
Yeah, it was definitely a challenge, right? Because you think about, like everything I just shared with you about what my parents went through. And, like, as with many, like, immigrant families and anyone who has parents that are, like, new to the States, like, they're going through, like, it wasn't until, like, years later into adulthood and, like, doing my master's program that I really start to think about it and realize and learn about, like, the trauma that my parents went through, and especially my dad, through like war and having to like carry the weight of being that person to make sure he can find a job and sponsor his family to come over. And so I grew up being told all those stories, right? Kind of like as a reminder, it's like, hey, it's like, you think first grade is hard? You know, we got shot up in the river, right? And then the year after, hey, you think second grade is hard? You know, we
used to do
we didn't have shoes over there, right? You think third grade is hard, right? And so it's just this like constant reminder. But then as my own person, right, you hear it, you sort of embody it, you try to be sympathetic to your parents, but at the same time, it's also like, you know, people only know what they've experienced and what they've been through themselves, right? Someone can tell you all of the horrific and traumatic things they've been through, but unless you've also been through that yourself, then it's hard to like fully make sense of that, right? So growing up was just balancing a lot of the storytelling from back in the day, but also trying to make sense of like, you know, like being Hmong and being Asian in America, right?
Yeah.
Where do you fit? What especially like with regards to culture, right? What do you like, hip hop or like rap music? Do you like, you know, trance music? Like what kind of, like, who are you? What kind of person are you, right?
Yeah.
Because being Asian, there's no, especially you think about like mainstream media, there is no culture for Asian people in America, right?
Yeah.
Like white people have their own culture, black people have their own culture, even Native Americans have their own, and the Hispanic and Mexican population kind of have their own. But Hmong people, because we don't have a country, right? There's no mother country to go back to and say, oh, this is how the people in our country act, so this is how we're going to act as well too.
Yeah.
So there's kind of like this identity crisis. So we're growing up and we're just kind of like latching on to whatever we see and whatever we like.
What did you kind of like feel like you were like feeling off?
I mean, I think I was like most kids, right? Like that wasn't really a big issue. Again, I didn't realize it was an issue until much later in life. So for the most part, I think I was just a normal kid, right?
Like everybody else.
Just into Pokemon cards and yo-yos, and played volleyball in high school, and you know, hung out with friends, and you know, went to graduation, went to prom. So you know, just like typical American kid stuff, right?
Okay.
But at the same time, in the back of your head, you have this constant reminder that you're not fully American, or AKA like you're not fully white. You know, your origin story is very different from, obviously from everyone, but it's very different, especially from like white people who have been here generations. And then to somehow try to like make sense of that as a young person, and to use that as maybe like motivation to inspire yourself to do better, right? Because it's like, you know, our parents could only do so much with what they have, right? Like not only do they escape a war-torn country, come start a brand new life in a different country, and then like raise us to the best of their ability. Like, they've given us to a certain degree like every possible chance to be successful and to succeed and to try our best. And so we got to take that. We have to acknowledge that and take that. But you know, obviously, like not everyone, you know, like not to, like, I'm not bragging, but like not everyone turned out regular or normal like me, right? There was definitely like in the early 90s like a large like gang presence among the youth, right? And naturally, right? But it's mostly probably because of bullying that happened in school, probably because of, you know, not every family was doing as well financially. Not every Hmong family was able to figure out how to adjust to American life, right? And so if the parents aren't adjusting well, then the kids are going to have a hard time adjusting. And if the parents can't like figure out their trauma and figure out that, hey, like our old life was the old life, we need to focus on our kids and try to give them this new life, then sometimes the kids are, you know, they'll latch on to things that aren't the greatest as well too. Yeah. And so that just kind of creates a vicious cycle of like gang violence and kids dropping out of school and having, you know, kids at a young age, starting families at a young age. And so but it's like it's the common struggle among, like, I think any, not just immigrant group, but any group that is having a hard time adjusting to like a new country, right?
Were those problems that you saw around you, or that you know have happened somewhere?
Yeah, so fortunately not so much around me and my siblings, and I think it's because I think my parents were try their best to like, put us in situations where we weren't exposed to that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, fortunately, my aunts and uncles, right, like my mom's brothers and sisters and my dad's brothers and sisters, because they were also like the OGs to a certain degree. Like, some of my aunts and uncles were born in Laos and Thailand and then moved here when they were like elementary, middle school, high school age, and so they had to adjust as well too. And so fortunately, they did not get like sucked into that life. And so because they were not sucked into that life, then we weren't sucked into it. Because I think if they were, because I have an uncle that I'm pretty cool with. He's only like 3 years older. If he had gotten sucked into it, I may have gotten sucked into it, right? And so it's just kind of like luck of the draw, right? Because some people avoided it, and others, unfortunately, like the whole family, or like all the brothers or all the sisters, they all got pulled into it. And then obviously, like with most people that are in that life, it's not until like you have a family or later on in life, that you learn the hard way and you realize, this is probably not going to like do anything for my life, so I should probably do something else, right? So, yeah, and that kind of answers your question. Yeah.
Interesting. Let's see. How do you feel about how the media portrays kind of like your ethnic or racial group? Do you think that affects
for sure
you and I?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges about being like Asian in the U.S. not just, and I'm not even talking about like Mong yet, right? Because within the Asian umbrella, right, you have Chinese, Japanese, Koreans, Taiwanese, Mongolians, Lao, Thai, Vietnamese, Cambodians, right? So there's so many ethnic groups, individual ethnic groups that fall under this category of Asian. And so when you grow up and you like, as an Asian person, and you like see TV and movies, like when I was growing up and watching movies, and as I am older now and I watch older movies that feature like Asian characters, they're always talking in like an accent. They're always doing something goofy. They're always like portrayed as like they just got here, they just landed here from China like 2 days ago, right? And so they're just like this dorky Asian that has a thick accent and has no idea what they're doing. And that was always kind of the portrayal. But in my head, it's like, that's not me, right? Like, I feel like I'm pretty normal in terms of what I've been exposed to. Like, I consume the same media. I'm into Pokemon cards. I like yo-yos and the same.
Fluent English.
Yeah, speak fluent English. The same thing as like my white classmate, my black classmate, my Hispanic classmate, right? But yeah, when I watch movies and shows, I'm portrayed in this totally different way. And I think as kids it doesn't affect you as much, but as you get older, you start to be more critical of that, right? Because then because it's important how everything is portrayed, right? It's important because you think about, like, for example, superhero movies, right?
Yeah.
Like 90% of superhero movies has like a white dude being the hero.
Yeah.
Right? And so when that's the case, then you start looking at white people like a little more favorably. Like, because I've seen all the superhero movies I've seen have a white guy and he's a superhero.
Yeah.
I see a white guy in person, you're probably a low-key superhero, right? Versus like for example, and this is kind of what is portrayed sometimes too, like black people.
Yeah.
In movies are portrayed as like gangsters or poor or violent or just funny, like they're just a comedian, right? And then you see them in real life, and then that changes your perception of them as well too, because of what you're consuming in media. And then you see Asian people, right, talking in accents, being goofy and dorky. So when you see an Asian person actually in person, then you sort of like impart those sort of manipulated thoughts onto that actual person, and then it's not correct, it's not healthy, it's not wise to do as well too. And so growing up, it was just a lot of, I'm just being me, right? I'm just trying to be me, I'm just trying to do me, I'm not trying to be anyone I'm not. And at least at the time, it's like whoever I saw in movies that was Asian, I just never felt like it portrayed. me personally, or my parents, or my extended family. I just felt like it was basically racist.
Yeah, I get what you
Lack
mean.
of better words. So, um, but things have gotten better, right? Things have
Yeah.
gradually gotten better over time. Um, like Shang-Chi as a Marvel, an Asian
That
Marvel
was a good
head.
movie.
Yeah, so it's just like
Yeah.
cool. Now there's an Asian guy who's a superhero, right? He's not being portrayed as just a foreigner, someone who's not from here, right? That he's just a regular guy like everyone else. He just skin color is different, culture is different, right? So
Good.
Yep.
Okay. Very insightful. Hmm. Let's see. Do you feel any pressure, like to conform to any expectations, or like educationally or financially, or?
yeah, I think within Asian culture, and probably because especially because within like the Asian umbrella, right?
Yeah.
There's probably a few more, but I'm being very surface level.
Mhm.
There are East Asians, and there are Southeast Asians. I don't know if you've heard of that distinction before.
I think kind of.
So East Asians are like the Chinese,
Mhm.
the Japanese, the Koreans.
Yeah.
And then Southeast Asians, because they're literally south and east of the East Asians,
Yeah.
right? Because Asia is referred to as the East,
Mhm.
right? And then America is referred to as the West, right? Not sure
Yeah.
why that's the case,
Uh-huh.
but that's just the terminology. And so when they're referring to like the East, they're kind of referring to like East Asians. So Southeast Asians, like, what is the term? Historically, and also basically historically, are poorer than East Asians, because East Asians have been around for a little bit longer, right? You think about the Chinese history, the Japanese history, Korean history, like they have dynasties of like kings and queens that date back thousands of years, right? And so their history is more developed, their economies are more developed, and therefore their people are generally wealthier as well too, right? Whereas Southeast Asians have a younger history, a little bit more war torn, like China, Korea, Japan, like they've had their wars as well too, but they've been able to like come out of it very robustly.
Yeah.
Southeast Asia has had their issues with war, but haven't been able to come out as robust. And so that distinction, it kind of carries itself to like the U.S. as well too, where Southeast Asians are generally like a little more impoverished, whereas East Asians are generally a little more wealthier. And so, as a Southeast Asian kid, and also the oldest of 5 siblings, there was always that pressure to like don't mess up. Like you're the oldest, so you have to set an example. You have to not necessarily like I never really got the pressure from my parents, because I'm sure you heard like within Asian cultures, parents want their kids to either be doctors, lawyers, or engineers.
I feel like I have heard that. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that wasn't really a specific pressure that was placed on me.
Mm-hmm.
Others, probably like around my age or younger, like that pressure was probably placed on them, but fortunately it wasn't on me. And so I was really just trying to figure myself out, right? Like I was decent in a lot of like subjects in school because I thought you had to be. I thought you had to be really good at like everything, right?
Yeah.
Not realizing that, hey, if you're really good at, or you can just be really good at one thing, and then that'll just open up doors for you. So I tried to be really good at English and writing. I also tried to be really good at math, and I was kind of mediocre at the sciences, but I kind of tried, right?
Yeah.
And so when I graduated high school, no idea what I wanted to major in, no idea what I wanted to do, because I never had those conversations with my parents, right? They were just kind of like working to keep us like a roof over our head, food on the table. So they never really had the time to sit down and be like, hey, I'm looking at your grades and you're doing good in English. Maybe you should like go the English route, because they didn't know either, right? Because they never went to like college, they never finished high school as well, and so they're not able to have these conversations with us, and so we're forced to navigate on our own, right? And the only help that we get are with peers, right? So people that we're growing up with, and hopefully they're good influence, because if they're not, then we're going to go downhill with them. Or if you're lucky to come across like teachers and counselors that see your potential, and then they help push you in a certain direction, right? But besides that, yeah, it was just figuring things out, trying to decide what I wanted to do, what was best for me based on my skill sets, and go from there.
How was that path to finding like what you wanted to do?
Yeah, so I ended up majoring in business administration, mostly because my mom and my aunts and uncles were in business, right? So like my mom, she eventually became like a cosmetologist, or someone who cuts hair, and so she eventually like was able to have her own business, like her own shop. And so when I was like a senior going into college, I actually told myself, because I took a speech and debate class senior year in high school, I was like, I kind of like this, and I think I could be pretty decent at it. So I was like, I think I want to go be a lawyer, right? Go to law school. And somewhere between senior year and freshman year, it just, like, it didn't really connect, right? So I told myself, lawyer. I do my first year of college taking general ed classes. It's like really easy, so I feel like I'm not anywhere closer to like none of my classes freshman year pushed me in that law direction, right? So in a way, it wasted a year. By the time sophomore year came around, okay, taking like a little harder general ed classes, but still not being pushed into the law route as much. And so by the time junior year came around, where you have to now commit to what your major was going to be, because I had no exposure to like law, and I was just like, all right, I'll just go business, because my mom is, she runs a business.
Yeah.
And then when I look at my transcript, that's when my grades kind of tanked.
Oh yeah. Because
if someone had that conversation with me and said, hey, like based on your grades, based on your test scores, you're more of a this subject, right? Consider these fields. I probably would have excelled, right? But I went into like a complete opposite field.
It was just kind of like whatever.
Yeah, it was just whatever I thought, right? Whatever I thought would be good for myself, but my grades definitely didn't reflect that, And so, didn't do the greatest with business, but eventually finished it anyways, and didn't really do anything with the business degree in general. I mean, the only thing that has been helpful is just having like a theoretical understanding of how a business works, but never actually get into applying those skills. So not only did I not go a lawyer route, I didn't even get to like utilize my degree as a business undergrad. And there's maybe not relevant to what I'm sharing now, but there's a story as to how I got to working in education. But essentially, yes, the pressure was there, but pressure without guidance, without knowing what you're doing, where you're going, where you're headed, leads a lot of people to either drop out or just finish with something that they weren't really passionate about.
Did you see that problem like in any people you knew from like the same ethnic group?
To be honest, like in retrospect, yes, right? Later in life. But in the moment, no, because I was worried about myself.
Yeah.
Right? It's like I can't worry about like even my equivalent like friends who are on the same grade level, because I got to figure out what I'm gonna do next, right? And so I think even that was kind of tricky, that there just wasn't enough of a focus on that, right? Because the sort of the underlying story, the underlying person to this, like even my whole college journey, is I have a sister who's 11 months younger. So my birthday's in December, her birthday's in November. And so because I'm a December baby is like we go to school late. We got to wait till the next school year. And so because of that, me and her, basically, we went to the same grade level our whole lives. And so a lot of people thought we were twins, right? But the point is, we finished high school together, and she was the one that was like, oh, I think I'm going to go here. Like, she was the one that had an idea about what she wanted to pursue.
Yeah.
I was just following her, right? This is like, because in the beginning, she was like, oh, I'm going to go to Fresno City College because they have an honors program. I was like, all right, cool. I'll do that too.
I'll do that too.
And then eventually she was like, I don't want to do that. Right? This is like the summer. This is the summer between, like, high school graduation and the start of college.
Yeah.
So this is that summer in between. And eventually she was like, I don't want to do Fresno City. Like, I'm going to go to Fresno State. I'm like, all right, I'm going to go to Fresno State too, right? And so just not really having, someone to ask me questions. Like, whoa, like, your sister's going, but you don't have to go. What do you want to do, right? Like, that conversation never entered my life at that time.